for making time for us.
Thanks for having me, Ntombi. Appreciate it.
Everybody kind of gets it now that property is the way to go. Getting, a property and renting it out even better, even if you are breaking even. However, there are always those dynamics between landlord and tenant, whether there's an agent involved or not. Let's talk about the beginning of renting out one's property. So I own a house and I want to start renting it out. What is the first step that I need to take, Simon?
All right, if you're a new home owner and you're wanting to invest in property and make an income from the property, it's most important to assess the affordability of the respective tenants, first and foremostly. They've got to be able to afford the rent, and that boils down to one doing a good background check on the tenants, just to make sure that they're employed, they've got a pay slip, you can check out their bank statements. Just make sure that they are able to provide a sense of security to you upfront so that you can safely sign a lease agreement for a certain period of time. That's the second step. The lease agreement is the most important thing to have in place.
Yeah.
It's best to have a written lease agreement as opposed to a verbal one, just so that you can get commercial certainty between yourself and the tenants. And that lease normally will provide for a 6-month or a 12-month period. And one of the most important clauses to put in the lease is the deposit clause, just so that you can cover yourself for a month or two should the tenant fall on hard times.
Let's talk about the deposit, right? So I've done all of that. I've checked that there is someone who's interested in renting out one of my properties. I've done a credit check and all of that, and I see that in their bank statement. It's looking good. It's someone who's responsible. They pay their accounts. They pay all their debt and all of that. And then we move on to now the deposit. I want to rent out my property at 10,000 Rand. How much should the deposit be? Should it be 10,000 and then some, or should it just be 10,000?
Yes, good question. I think the way to calculate that is to anticipate the risk of non-payments and the risk of them staying in the property without paying for the period that it takes you to potentially evict them if one has to go down that road as a last resort. And the eviction process would normally take about 2 or 3 months if things go perfectly. We can get into that a bit later. But essentially, I would say a deposit to cover you for about 2 or even 3 months worth of rental.
All right. Now, once Lonwabo, who's one of our sports anchors, was saying that she rented out one of her properties, and at the first couple of months, the tenants were paying well. Let's just say the rent was 5,000 Rand, and they were paying that 5,000 Rand. And then other months, they would pay 3,500 Rand, and that seemed to be a trend. When do I now start getting lawyers involved? Do I send a letter of demand immediately when the tenant starts defaulting on the rent?
Good question. So essentially, one has to be somewhat diplomatic with your tenant, in my opinion. Obviously, you have a commercial relationship with the tenant, and you want to give them a certain degree of appropriate leniency when it comes to specific performance of the lease agreements. There are different schools of thought. My approach would be to make an amicable request to the tenants on the first incident of non-payment. Give them a short period of time, maybe a week or 2 weeks, to make amends. And if they don't, and you feel that you're going to go down a path of them breaching the lease agreement long term, then I think it's better to be conservative and get a lawyer involved after about week 2 or week 3 of that initial breach, so that you can start the formal eviction process, which requires certain time periods to lapse to take next steps.
And now once we get the lawyers involved, and I've noticed that there's a trend with my tenant, they're not paying rent, and it's been like that. They've promised that they're going to pay on X amount date, but they didn't pay. Now, when the lawyer gets involved, what happens, Simon?
Okay, so as soon as an attorney gets involved, they'll be given a brief to make a legal demand for the payment of the arrear rental or the rent that wasn't paid. And that legal demand will come in the form of an eviction notice which is like a letter of demands, just putting into terms, saying that they've breached this particular clause of lease agreements, they need to pay. And if they don't fix that breach of the lease agreement within a certain period of time, and it's usually 20 business days, then the landlord is in a position to cancel the lease agreement and then proceed with an eviction procedure if necessary.
Let's talk about the eviction, which is the last resort. Are police involved? Are red ants involved? Because we've seen on television very, very horrific images of people being thrown out of, flats, and red ants being involved. Is it that dramatic? Is it that hectic?
Yeah, it depends, Ntombi. But look, what I'd like to say about the eviction process is that we've come from a history of forced land removals because of our unfortunate political and legal past.
Yeah.
And some very smart lawmakers have sat down and thought very long and hard about what the country needs in terms of property law in the context of evictions. And what we have now is a piece of law called PI for short, the Prohibition of Illegal Eviction Act for short, which basically creates an eviction process that tries to achieve fairness between a landlord and a tenant or an occupier.
Yeah.
And if applied properly, the PI process, eviction process, should achieve a just and equitable balance between the landlord getting his land back or her land back and the tenant or occupier's constitutional right to adequate housing not being unjustifiably infringed upon. And it all boils down to the execution of the eviction process and the rules or the terms and conditions that Parliament has given to us in terms of PI. So it doesn't have to be this big dramatic scenario or this bleak situation where tenants feel like they're going to be kicked out of their homes quickly, or the landlords feel that the tenants or the occupiers have more rights than them and they can stay on forever.
Yeah.
The proper management of the legal process is supposed to, in theory anyway, achieve an equitable balance between those two opposing parties.
Now, once we come to a tenant moving out of or being evicted, it's not a nice process, and some tenants destroy the property. We've heard people saying the doors were burnt down, the kitchen units were messed up. Now, who's liable for that damage? Am I the owner of the property liable for the damage? Must I now fix it? Or is the tenant still liable for the damages? Because they were the ones that were residing in that property and they were the ones that caused that damage. Can I sue, or can I go after the tenant to fix whatever damages have happened as a result of them being maybe upset about the eviction?
Yeah, quite right. Look, sometimes there are some very unfortunate cases where you have tenants who become unlawful occupiers that end up sabotaging the premises or the property, following kind of like a scorched earth policy. If I can't stay here, then nobody's going to stay here. And they can't take the law into their own hands and start damaging property that doesn't belong to them when they're in occupation of it. And that will ground a legal claim of damages by the landlord against that occupier for those damages that they caused to the property. And it's something that the landlord can definitely pursue in the local court of jurisdiction through a summons or action procedure. They'll have to prove the nature and extent of the damages caused by the occupier. And the best way to do that is to ensure that you've done a proper ingoing inspection of the state of the property right at the beginning and get that signed off in the presence of the new tenants before they move in, so that there's no disputes about the status or the states, rather, of the property. And they use that then in the summons action procedure to found a claim for damages. But sometimes it may be a waste of time because,
that's
some of the occupiers who can't pay rent, they don't have any money or any assets that you can generally attach in order to recover those funds.
Because it starts costing you money as the landlord, because now you're going this legal route and you're chasing after someone who doesn't have money and cannot actually, fix the damages that were done in the property. So sometimes it's better to just cut your losses.
Quite right, yeah. So it becomes a cost-benefit analysis. Ultimately, prevention is better than cure. You really want to vet your occupiers or your tenants really well up front. But if, in the worst-case scenario, if they do stay and they don't pay and they do cause damage, the best thing that you can try and do is to follow the eviction process perfectly without wasting any time. And the best way to do that is to get the assistance of a professional.
Simon, before I let you go, do you think it's best if I get an agent involved so that there's that middleman that deals with everything, that I don't directly deal with the tenant as a landlord? Would you advise someone to go that route? Because there are people that are listening to the show right now that have extra property. They've got properties that maybe they are thinking of renting it out. Would you suggest that they get an agent, or do you think that they can do it themselves? They can manage, dealing with a tenant and handling rental and everything else that comes with, renting out their property?
Good question. Look, it's like anything. You can try and do things yourself, but sometimes it's better to have somebody that's dedicated, qualified, and experienced to help you through technical issues. I would say that it's definitely worth considering appointing a managing agent to assist you with the do's and don'ts when it comes to managing property. But you just have to qualify that managing agent properly. You just have to interview them, make sure they've got capacity to assist you, they're familiar with the area, they're keeping abreast with the latest legal developments, and there's some clear terms of engagement between yourself and the agent when it comes to reporting back. The most important thing is that you want to make sure that agent is collecting your money on time and they're keeping it in a safe place.
Yeah.
So they can account for that to you on a month or weekly basis, depending on what you need. But problems arise where you end up entrusting this really important duty or responsibility to an agent that may not have the capacity or the willpower or the motivation to do a sterling job. So yes, the answer is they definitely are valuable. You just have to find the right agent that's compatible with your needs.
And sometimes you just have to pay that little extra in order to get someone who's an expert to get the job done properly, right?
Absolutely. So you sometimes do have to invest a little bit to get a bit of a reward, as long as they're making your life a little easier.
Very true. Okay. Simon, thank you so much for being our expert this afternoon. And how can people get a hold of you? And I know there's someone that's listening right now that's a landlord struggling to, evict a tenant. How can they get a hold of you, Simon?
Okay, you can reach me on my general email address at info@S for Simon, D for Dippenaar, followed by the word law, law.co.za. That's info@SDLAW.co.za.
Thank you so much, Simon. Have a wonderful day.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
That was our lawyer, our expert this afternoon. His name is Simon Dippenaar from SDLAW Attorneys, giving you the do's and don'ts when you are planning on evicting your tenant. It's not easy. Don't just kick someone out and say, "Huck, you didn't pay this month." No. There is a legal framework that one needs to follow, and hire a lawyer so that they can do the dirty work for you. Listen, there's 1 hour left of the show.